welcome back to the Athletes podcast. Today we continue our athlete story series with Anna Glenn, a former UCLA gymnast that talks about the trials and tribulations of her career with injury, dealing with depression, as well as the highs of winning a NCAA title and being part of a championship team. So hopefully you enjoy her inspirational story. So let's get right to the conversation with Miss Anna Glenn. So let's get started. First off, Anna Glenn, thank you very much for jumping on with me today. Welcome to the Athletes podcast. I am very intrigued by just the notes that I have on you and looking at your background. And I'm really interested in getting your story today. But first, let's start from square one. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Kind of what's your background story? I know it's very different than most.
Yeah, I have quite a long background story. I'll try to condense it a little bit, but I guess starting from the very, very beginning, I was born in China along with my twin sister, and then we were adopted when we were 15 months old and came into the States at that time. We grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. We grew up there our whole lives. And then because we were adopted, we ended up having malnutrition. We were malnourished kids at that point because we were in an orphanage and it was really tough to get resources in the orphanage. So we just didn't have that nutrients that we needed to be strong. And so then we developed rickets, which is basically a condition known as bowed legs. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't walk when we came to the States. It took me a long time to even crawl. I pretty much started crawling when everyone usually starts walking. So I was very delayed in terms of my gross motor skills. So because of that, and because my sister and I had just like an insane amount of energy when we were kids, my parents put us both into gymnastics. And that was usually just to grow and just basically make ourselves stronger.
How old were you when that happened, when you started gymnastics?
So we started around when we were 2 years old. So just shortly after we came to the States. And at that point, we just ended up sticking with it, and we ended up loving it. And then I guess it kind of propelled us into a college scholarship eventually. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like? Obviously, because gymnastics isn't really a sport that, it's not like a high school sport. It's not one of those sports that is kind of part of the norm that you see at pep rallies and stuff like that in high school.
Right, yeah.
So what was it like growing up for you, going through school as a gymnast, and what was your schedule like?
Yeah, so we were very disciplined all through our elementary, middle school, and high school stage. Because we got so, engrossed into the sport. By the time we were probably in like 4th or 5th grade, it would basically be just this routine where we would just wake up, go to school, and then right after school, we'd go straight to practice, have practice for about 4 to 4.5 hours every day. And then come home, eat, and then quickly shower, and then do our homework for the rest of the night. So we just really stayed onto that regimen of routine for as long as I can remember, pretty much up until we graduated high school. And then again, when we went to college, that schedule shifted a little bit because we had practices in the morning rather than the afternoons after school. But then again, it still stayed very regimented.
Yeah. So with it being you and your sister, how much would you say it helped the both of you going through it at the same time of, learning to crawl and learning to walk and then like transitioning into gymnastics and sticking to this schedule? Would you say that, having her there really helped you kind of get along throughout this process?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. She was definitely my biggest competitor when we went to competitions and stuff. For the longest time, we were neck and neck, 1 and 2 for a lot of competitions. So we helped each other become better gymnasts. And then just being able to have someone to stick to that schedule with was really, really beneficial. Like when we went to high school, like we would just drive to high school together and then just drive straight to practice. So it wasn't like one of us had to stay back at school or one of us just went home. It was really nice because we just stuck to that same schedule and just went with each other to pretty much everything. So that really, really helped in terms of staying, disciplined, in terms of not missing practices and stuff like that. So it was definitely helpful.
Yeah. And you said you two were like 1 and 2. Was there kind of a sibling rivalry where you kind of fought a little bit, or was it more
Um,
friendly than anything?
no, we're very close, and we rarely fight. So that was never really an issue for us. We were always in a healthy competition with each other. So we always, supported each other when someone got first, but obviously we knew that that person had a little bit of an edge on us whenever we went 1 and 2. So it was nice because it kind of brought us back into the gym and made sure that we worked harder so that we can get that number one spot. Subconsciously, we both obviously wanted that first place medal, but in the end, it didn't really truly matter because we were sharing it more or less.
Mm-hmm. So with being a gymnast, and you touched on it a little bit, you would go to school and then go to practice. Obviously, it's not a normal athletic upbringing.
Mhm.
As somebody like me who played football and had tons of friends around all the time, and that's kind of what it was. How much different would you say it is to grow up as a gymnast, as a really structured gymnast? And how different would you say your childhood was because of being a gymnast?
Yeah, I definitely think about that a lot where, growing up, a lot of our friends that we had in high school, not that we had a ton of friends to begin with, they all were very social people. They always went, hung out with other people outside of school and did other things. And we always had to sacrifice that. We were never really able to go out and enjoy that time right after school, and even on the weekends sometimes, because especially when season rolled around, we were traveling on the weekends, and sometimes we had to be pulled out of school for a couple of days depending on what the competition schedule was like. So we definitely had to sacrifice a lot of our social life, and in high school especially. But I didn't really have an issue with that because we did commit very, very early to UCLA. My sister and I both committed when we were in ninth grade. And so we definitely had that idea of, oh, we're going straight to college right after this. We're going to be across the country. I don't really feel the need to make a lot of high school connections because I know these won't really last. I know that's like not the greatest mindset to have, but at the same time, it definitely helped now that I'm staying out in California and have all my friends, all my closest friends are pretty much all here in Los Angeles. So, it kind of made it easier in terms of the transition of moving across the country and not really being super tied to a lot of people back at home. So yeah, it was definitely different in terms of how our social life kind of revolved. Back in middle school was when we were really, really invested into the sport in terms of, not really thinking about going elite, which is really basically the Olympic route, because we were approached by our coach during that time about it. But we just knew that we did want to go to public high school. We did want to go to college. So to make those things happen, we wanted to stay level 10, which is basically the highest level that you can possibly reach before going to the elite Olympic route. So we did end up going to a private school in middle school, just to make sure that our skill level was kind of up to par in terms of getting those college scholarships or having college scouts looking at us. And at that time, we had a lot of our teammates that went to the same private school together. So we had our little cohort, which is really nice. And that really solidified our social life during that time. We all went to school together. We all went to practice right after together and carpooled together. So that was really nice in terms of building those relationships. But then again, like in terms of having relationships within the school that were outside of athletics, it was a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So now you kind of touched on a couple of things that I want to get to, but the one thing was going to a private school and that academic part of student athlete, right? And they always say that you're student first. That student part, was that something that you and your sister struggled with, or was it something that you were pushed just like gymnastics with, where you wanted to strive to be 1 and 2, and it was never really an issue when you were looking at schools?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I would say the latter because my sister and I were very competitive when it came to school. And my parents also were it was such a high value in our family, being able to, do well in school and go to college and everything like that. So when we were in that middle school, in that private school, it wasn't really picking and choosing athletics over academics. It was more so combining the two. Um, yes, the schedule was easier academically, but I did think that I learned a lot through that private school. And a lot of the teachers recognized that my sister and I, along with some of my other teammates that were there, were very academically gifted. And so they would always challenge us and give us harder quizzes, give us harder tests and things like that to make sure that we were, still reaching our potential in terms of academics. So that was really nice to have, like a smaller class group where the teachers would recognize where your strengths and weaknesses are and would basically cater to those. And that really helped me in high school because I learned so much through that middle school that I was able to stay up in terms of academic level with everybody else that went to a public school. And then when we went to public school, high school, we took some AP classes and made sure that our grades were still within a good GPA because, UCLA was still looking at our grades and making sure that those were in line with the values of UCLA so that when we came to school, we would be able to be successful.
Yeah. So one of the other things that you touched on is committing early, at least as a freshman, right? There aren't too many athletes in general that commit early. However, in gymnastics, isn't this something that is kind of like the norm?
Yeah. So it kind of started along the lines of when my sister and I were being recruited. That's when the early recruiting really, really started. So we were approached right after nationals of, I want to say 2015. No, 2015 because 2012. My goodness. 2012 is when we went into high school. So that 2012 period from after finishing 8th grade into starting 9th grade, that's when we started getting approached after that nationals that we went to. So it was really, really fast, that whole process. Obviously, my dad really helped us get through it. He is a big numbers guy and he loves looking at statistics, and he basically created this whole spreadsheet where he would write out the rankings of all the schools that we could potentially be interested in terms of top school academically, in terms of top school athletically, and then the combined composite score basically. And so that really was like the template that we used to determine which schools we wanted to look at. And then we kind of went from there. But yeah, in terms of, being recruited, I think it really just started at that point. And then it just kind of started tumbling more and more down where kids in like 8th grade were getting recruited, like not even right after 8th grade or like at the beginning of their 9th grade year. Like when they were in 8th grade, they started getting recruited, which is like bizarre to me. And personally, I didn't feel like that was right because I just don't feel like kids at that age really have a full understanding of what college is like or really understand the whole concept of college. I mean, I definitely didn't know what college was like by any means because we had just finished middle school and we're just starting high school, and like that alone is a huge transition period. So I feel like it is better for kids to get recruited within their high school career, but it was stressful for some kids that weren't getting recruited later down the road, like in junior or senior year, because that's when you're starting applications and you want to know where you're going. So it was a huge relief in terms of my sister and I knowing that we had something more or less solidified. Obviously, it was a verbal commitment. It wasn't on paper. So we still had to keep up with academics. We still had to keep up with athletics and make sure that we were healthy and make sure that we were competing well in order to maintain that spot. But being able to know that we had someone that was very interested in us and definitely wanted us a part of their team was a huge relief.
Yeah. So what's it like being recruited that young? I mean, you said, you don't really like that recruiting kind of happens at that young age. What was it like for you and your sister to navigate that along with the help of your dad, who you said was doing all these rankings for you?
Right. It was stressful because I didn't really know how to communicate with these coaches. I was so young that talking to them was really difficult, and I didn't know how to hold a conversation. I had rarely talked on the phone before then, to someone that was, more or less a stranger. So it was definitely weird. My dad would definitely help us out in terms of how to communicate with them, how to email them, how to talk to them on the phone, making sure that we were saying the right things. But yeah, I mean, like, over time we got really comfortable with it now that we started to know the coaches after they came out to visit us multiple times after we went to unofficial visits and stuff. So over time we did become more comfortable with them, and it was a lot easier to communicate with them, but at first I was definitely intimidated. And like, the whole recruiting process is just like, oh, I don't really know what to say to these people. Like, yes, I'm interested in their program, but like, aside from the fact it's like, oh, you have a strong gymnastics program, oh, you have like a really strong academic program, like, I was like, I don't know what else to say. So it was a little tough trying to navigate that. But again, over time I kind of started to figure it out, started doing a little bit more research on the schools and stuff like that, and eventually started you know coming up with like talking points and stuff. So yeah, eventually we got there, but it took a lot of time to adjust and figure out how to navigate all that.
Yeah. Now, was it tough mentally, because obviously you were, still competing while you're being recruited? Is it
Right.
tough mentally knowing that as a eighth grader, ninth grader, you're having these colleges who you won't see for another, 5 years looking
Right.
at you? Does it take a toll on you academically? Does it take a toll on you competitively, knowing that these schools are looking at you?
I think in that sense, I think for me personally, it pushed me in terms of to like make myself better, to make sure I really am attaining those goals that I want to attain, being able to push myself academically so that they can see that I really do care about my academics, and that I'm really trying to make sure that I'm on level with the academic rigor that I will be seeing when I go to college. And same with the athletics, knowing that they're recruiting Olympians and elite gymnasts and things like that that are definitely have a higher level of athleticship than I do. So
Mhm.
I think knowing that the group that I would be surrounding myself with really pushed myself to be better when I was in that middle school, high school stage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Now, when you are, you commit, obviously, um, what's it like once you commit? How do things change? Would you say that the spotlight kind of grew knowing that, oh, this eighth grader, this ninth grader just commit to UCLA?
Right.
Would you say that there
Mhm.
was more of a spotlight on you once that happened?
Um, I would say that, I mean, definitely it feels like more eyes are watching you now that I know that all the coaches were invested in my career and like just following me as I went along through high school. But it was a bit of relief, and I didn't feel as much pressure knowing that all the schools were looking at me. And it kind of narrowed my goals, and kind of made me a little more goal oriented, where I was like, okay, like for UCLA specifically, I know I need this GPA. For UCLA specifically, I know that they're looking at this type of athletics or this type of, skill set or whatever it is. So making sure that like I was just focused on what UCLA wanted out of me, it was a little bit easier. So I didn't have to kind of think about what other schools wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, and then at that point, I just became obsessed with UCLA and was just wearing UCLA gear all around the school and stuff like that. So I became very proud when I was in high school after I committed, knowing that I was like, oh, I'm going to this top tier school, this D1 school, and knowing that I have like all these goals in my future, and that I have all this potential. So it just made me kind of stand up a little bit taller, and just made me a little bit, have like a bigger idea of what to do, kind of like gearing me into the right path. So that
Yeah.
was really nice. Mhm.
Well, I know, when it comes to being recruited in general, and one of the things that some, athletes have to worry about is that the person they're being recruited by is still going to be there when they get there.
Mhm,
Is
mhm.
that coach going to be there, or could they leave, or could they be
Right.
fired, or whatever else?
Mhm.
Um, was that a question for you when it came to looking at schools, knowing, like I said, that you were 4 or 5 years away from even being on
Right.
campus, the coaching staff that's talking to you and calling you could be completely different by the time that you get there. Was
Right.
that ever a question? And how did you kind of put that out of your mind to make your decision?
Yeah, that definitely slipped my mind when we were doing the recruiting process. Is like, oh, I can't base my whole decision just solely on how I feel about the coaches or the connection that I made with the coaches. Like that was definitely something I was very aware of during the recruiting process. But it was also a factor that influenced my decision because I didn't want to go to a school where I knew like the values of the coaches and potentially would be passed down to somebody else and like would maintain that, kind of vibe, I would say more or less. I knew that I really liked the way the program was set up at UCLA and how I felt about the campus and how I felt about the team. And knowing that was a huge influence on how I decided to go to UCLA. I did really, I don't think that knowing that the coaches could potentially leave was really a main issue for me. Miss Val has such a huge legacy at UCLA, and knowing that she solidified that at such a young age for herself, I had no doubt that she would leave until she would retire. So, and I didn't see retirement fully in her, in that path of when I was going to be there until like the very end where she did actually retire right before my senior year. But she still stayed connected with everybody else. And then obviously Chris and Randy were fantastic. And then eventually we did have a coaching change during our senior year and a lot of staff change within the athletic community. Itself had a lot of change, but I was okay with that change, knowing that I was also leaving after a year and that the people that they were bringing in, I did have relationships with too prior. So it wasn't like a huge shock or anything like that. And we had so many meetings about it and stuff when we were on the team about it. But like starting out, like my freshman, sophomore, junior year, I didn't have any doubt in my mind that those coaches would leave unless something tragic happened or anything like that. Or Miss Val, obviously, she retired. So I didn't think it was that much of an issue for me. But again, yeah, it's definitely something you can't base your entire decision off of. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, were you and your sister being recruited together, or were some schools calling you and some schools calling her, or was it always kind of a package deal?
It was more or less a package deal, and we made that very clear when we were doing the recruiting process. We were like, well, if you're going to take one of us, you definitely have to take the other. So we definitely knew early on that we wanted to go to college together, knowing that we had more or less been inseparable up until our senior year of high school. And then like at that point, that's when we kind of started branching out, making different friends and like, really establishing our own personalities. And then college, we definitely did that. But it was really nice being able to have her with me, and we've lived together up and like we're still living together. So, we're very close, and it's very hard to kind of, let go of that bond. But yeah, we definitely made it very clear. We're like, you're going to have both of us. You're going to have to have one of us. And that actually did become an issue when we were recruiting. Because a couple of schools were like, oh, I think we can only offer one spot at this time, or we want to save this one spot for, a high profile athlete. And we are like, okay, well, then that doesn't really help our case. So we're going to have to let you go on our end because we really need to have the two of us together. So, and
so
it
in a
worked
sense,
out.
it kind of made it easier, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it made it a little bit easier for us to narrow our search for some of the schools for sure.
Yeah. How many schools were calling you guys?
Well, technically we honestly didn't really get recruited by that many schools because it was so early and a lot of schools hadn't really started that early recruiting process yet. And we're very hesitant on providing an offer to like a ninth grader pretty much. So the main schools, we did take an unofficial visit to Penn State when I was up in Pennsylvania visiting my grandparents, and that was our first unofficial visit ever. And then we looked at Stanford, Georgia, and UCLA. And I think those were just like the three main schools that we're definitely interested in, knowing that they had the top programs of athletics and academics that we were looking for. So We really narrowed our search very, very early on to just those main 3 or 4 schools. And then after taking an unofficial visit to UCLA, we're like, we can't make any more decisions. Like this is the one. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like I said, it happened very, very quickly. Um, and luckily, because it was so early and a lot of schools expressed interest. You're like, oh, the Glenn twins, they're really, really great. When we were at nationals that one year in 2012. So we knew a lot of schools were interested, but we knew that a lot of schools were still hesitant on providing an offer or really, I guess, just pursuing us at that point, just because it really was so early. And I understand, I totally understand their hesitancy about it. But some schools were like, nope, we're going to hop on the train right now. And we're just going to offer them. So, and at that point, our dad was like, you should really just take an offer while you can, because, these offers they're going to go quickly. It's like once all these elite athletes start coming out and shining out, like you're going to be overshown by them. So we're like, okay, we're going to take this offer now while we have it. So, and it worked out perfectly fine. So
Certainly. And one thing that happens is, when obviously you can't sign until you're a certain age anyway.
right.
Did you have a lot of schools trying to persuade you guys to go to their school even after you commit to UCLA?
Yeah, I mean, like we had, gosh, we had so many emails coming in all through high school. It's just like emails from all these different schools. It's like, oh, we're interested in you, and they would call my dad up, they would call my coaches up, and they were just like, oh yeah, like all these schools are interested. But we are like, sorry, we're committed. So we more or less would just like ignore those interests, just because we were so set on where we wanted to go. So yeah, I mean, like schools obviously, like they expressed interest all the way up until our signing day, because they knew they still had that chance. It's kind of like a never say never situation where it's like it doesn't hurt to try. Even though the likelihood of you like transferring or thinking about doing like going a different route was very low, they still had that opportunity to reach out to us. So yeah, I mean, we still got emails up until our signing day, which is just funny because they all knew they all knew we were interested in UCLA. So
Yeah,
it's funny.
So what was it about UCLA for the both of you that got your commitment, especially as such a young athlete, that really kind of took hold of you guys?
I think, well, location has a huge influence on us. We loved the atmosphere of UCLA, and I remember walking around campus during an official visit and just like saying like, oh, this feels so much like home. Like I just feel like I could really immerse myself in this school and just feel so right at home, and feel like everybody here is supporting me. Everyone here is pushing me to be my best version of myself. The team, when we met them, were just the friendliest people. And Miss Val always ingrained this in the team's brain. Basically, it's like when a guest comes into the gym, you go up to them, you greet them, you make sure that they feel comfortable in the environment that you're at, because you're inviting them into your space. So that was a huge value of Miss Val's and the teams. And because of that, everybody just like swarmed over to us when they came and saw us, and it was just so heartwarming. And just that is the atmosphere that I knew I wanted to grow up in, and really kind of develop my values into my adulthood. So even that was like a huge attraction. And then when we were like meeting with the coaches and the athletic team and everybody else that were on the staff, they were just so nice, and everybody just seemed so invested in both my athletic career, my academic career, and just my overall well-being as a human being, and just really wanting to make sure that I could be a very successful person coming out of college, not just, having those awards on my back, and not just being academically, proven and things like that. So it was really nice knowing that they cared about, a very comprehensive version of myself. And not every school, I wouldn't say any school really that we looked at other than that UCLA really valued that as much. So that was a huge grabber for sure.
Now with the, one of the things you said was location was important.
Mm-hmm.
You said you grew up in North Carolina though. UCLA
right?
is a very long way from
It is
home.
very long.
What was it about knowing you were going all the way across the country that still felt like home?
Well, you know what? It's so this kind of goes into a whole racial thing. So I was adopted into a white family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, love my family to death. They're the best. But growing up, I didn't have any really huge connection to my cultural backgrounds. I didn't have a lot of Asian friends. The only Asian, or I would say East Asian friends that I had were adopted as well.
Yeah.
Um, but it was great because my parents really tried to immerse us into that group and that culture. And that was like our main way of staying connected with, being Chinese and things like that. So my parents were very inclusive in terms of that and trying to make sure that we were still rooted into our background. But then, surrounding myself, I was around people that did not have the same background as me. And it didn't really bother me when I was growing up because that was all I really knew.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I came to UCLA and toured, I was like, wow, there's so many East Asians out here. There's so many people that look like me. There's so many people that talk like me. Like everybody just seems so friendly and just like it's just like the atmosphere, And then so I think that had a huge impact. Knowing that there were so many more people that had similar backgrounds as me that I could connect with on a different level when I came to college. And I did that. I joined a club at UCLA when I was in undergrad during my sophomore year called Association of Chinese Americans, ACA. And that's where my main friend group kind of came out of. I got really, really close to those people that I met through that club. And I live really close to a few of them now, and it's my main cohort right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the best. So it's been really nice being able to kind of reconnect in that way. I'm learning a lot more about myself, learning more about my culture. So that has been a huge, significant thing that stuck out to me going to UCLA. And I definitely knew I wouldn't be getting that if I went to Georgia or if I went to somewhere on the East Coast. Stanford potentially I could get that, but I don't know. I think that UCLA was just such a warming environment to step into, and that really was a huge, attraction for me.
Yeah. Was that something you expected, or was it kind of did it kind of shock you that that was something on your list that kind of came out of nowhere? Obviously, you look at schools and you're like academics and the athletics and the coach and everything else and the atmosphere, but then you start looking around the school and you're like, this is something culturally that I really feel I fit into. Was that did that come as a shock to you?
It did a little bit, yeah. I mean, when I went for my first few unofficial visits, I definitely saw that there was a huge, diverse group of people at UCLA. And that was a huge attraction. I definitely liked that about the school, knowing that there are, every single type of human you could possibly look at that all within UCLA. So I knew I was going to get to know a lot of great people and a lot of people with very diverse backgrounds, but I had no idea I was going to join this club. I had no idea who they were going to be, like my main friend group going throughout college. So yeah, it was a huge shock. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know the club existed when I first committed or anything. I didn't know it existed until my sophomore year of college. So yeah, it was definitely unexpected, but a really good unexpected twist into my career. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, as a competitor, when you get there and things change, obviously, it's not the same as your recruiting trip where everyone is greeting you and everything else. Now these are your teammates, they're pushing you, arguments happen between teammates and everything else like that, right? So like, how was it being on campus and kind of balancing the academic as well as the athletic kind of culture once you got there?
Mm-hmm. I definitely had a hard time coming in for a variety of reasons. First of all, so I tore my labrum in my right shoulder during my senior year of high school. And that was my first major injury. And I had to sit out my whole senior year because of that after getting surgery and whatnot. And then I came to UCLA and I was super pumped because I was rehabbing. I was doing well. I was bonding with the team and everything when we came here for summer school. Everything was going great until I tore my shoulder again during our preseason training camp. And that just totally shattered me because I knew I had to sit out another season and I was going to miss my freshman year. So my freshman year was definitely not the freshman year anybody ever plans on having or expects. I experienced my first wave of depression. I had a hard time with weight gain and such like that, and connecting with the team because I wasn't traveling. So there was a lot of mishaps throughout that year. I did learn so much. It was a huge growing period for me, huge transitional period for me. But I think it really made myself turn around my life, because then the following year it was like the best year of my life. We won a national championship. Everything was just smooth sailing that year. So I think that year was super crucial in terms of my development as a human person, as a human being, and as an athlete and everything. And but academics wise, it was super hard because I came in as pre-med bio, which was like the worst decision of my life. I was like, I don't know, these classes are so hard. I'm taking such a huge load. Like that first quarter, I had like an LS class which had coding in it, and then I had another like bio class and like a chem class, and I was like, this is just like so hard. I don't know how to handle myself. I was not doing well academically. So then I ended up changing my major after that summer, to psychology, which ended up being the best decision of my life because I loved my major. I thrived in it. But yeah, it was just like that first, quarter, and that first whole year actually was just like so tough for all those reasons listed. So balancing that was something that I had to learn. I didn't know how to manage going to practice in the morning and then going straight to class all chalky and sweaty and tired and barely eaten, and it was a lot of adjustment. And then like of course after that, going home and then just doing all the homework that was assigned and all the readings and everything like that. So learning how to be a college student and learning how to be a college athlete are two huge things to take on. And then when you combine them, it's a lot of work. So it took me pretty much like a whole year to figure it out. But after I did figure it out, I kind of got in a rhythm. I realized that asking for help is a huge thing, and that you should definitely do that and take advantage of all the resources that school can offer. Surrounding yourself with people that can be supportive, in all aspects of your life, making sure that you seek help, academically, mentally, physically, all of that. I learned very early on. Saw my first therapist. So, it was a lot of firsts,
Yeah.
but it all worked out. It all became a huge, part of who I am today. Um, I feel like that whole growing period was just so monumental for me. And now I feel like I'm a much stronger person because of it.
Yeah. How did you said it took you a year to figure it out? What was
Mhm.
it that changed, mentally, physically? Was it a person that you talked to? Was it your sister? Was it your friend group, a teammate, coach that kind of helped you figure it out?
I think, well, I got a lot of tough love from my coaches for sure. They pushed me into getting the help that I needed. They pushed me into making sure that I was prioritizing the things I needed to prioritize rather than, focusing on things that didn't matter or focusing on things that I shouldn't really be focusing on. So they kind of helped gear me in a direction. My sister was actually the one that brought up my mental health issues to my coach, who prompted me to go see a therapist. So it was a lot of people kind of coming to me to figure out what I needed rather than me reaching out for those resources that year. So that was a whole learning experience in itself. But yeah, it took me kind of finally immersing myself into those resources, and then kind of going through that process for that first year to really figure it out myself.
Yeah.
And mentally for sure, because I was just in such a deep hole at that point. After, I would say, during that final period of preseason all the way through season, like that whole like winter period was just so dark for me, because I was still figuring out what I wanted to do for my major. I was still figuring out how to connect with the team since they were all going off every weekend to travel and I couldn't join them. I was missing out on a lot of the team bonding in terms of that aspect. Um, So yeah, it was after season had ended, then I was like, okay, I need to really get back on track. I really need to eat healthy. I really need to start working out more, doing more cardio, all these things, and just like really making a checklist for myself, kind of guiding me towards like what I wanted to do. And we're really big at UCLA, in terms of like figuring out like what our goals are. Very goal oriented group. And so having like a vision board really helped, so that I can see what I want to accomplish in the next year or so, like right up on my face when I go to my locker every day. So, learning what affirmations are, learning what, positive feedback is and things like that. So just really taking in all of those things, and really absorbing it all is how I ended up becoming a better person and how I ended up kind of making that shift.
Yeah. So then throughout the rest of your career, that next year you guys win a title and,
Yeah.
you're doing very well. The team is doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of juxtapose that against that first year coming in. Like you said, it was smooth sailing. What was it about the team and academics that just had everything clicking from then on?
Well, I think that team itself, that 2018 team, was just so special. I don't know what it was, but everybody bonded so well. We had like little to no problems, in terms of drama on the team. Everybody just felt so connected, and it was just like some electric energy that kind of like surrounded that team that year. We were all so focused on each other. We didn't really focus on a lot of outside factors, and I think that was a huge, influence into how our performance was. So I think that everyone was just so locked in with each other and locked in with what they were doing and making sure that they were doing everything that they needed to do inside and outside of the gym to better the team. So just constantly adding to the team was kind of how we all became this, championship team. And we all felt it even at the beginning of preseason. We're like, this team is going to win a national championship. We all manifested that. We all felt that we were so focused on that one goal that we were going to do everything in our power to make sure that happened. Everyone wanted to make sure that, we were, focused on, doing like academically well. We were all like supporting each other academically, supporting each other mentally, and making sure that everybody was healthy inside and outside the gym. So I think it's just like the amount of support that team provided for each other was really the turning point. And then I think academically for me, it was just finding my passion, finding that I wanted to be in the psychology major, and, taking the classes that really fueled me rather than taking classes that weren't really something I was interested in or boring or too difficult, like finding like a healthy medium. Um, so I think that was also a huge influence to my performance academically. And that year I also found my main cohort through the club. And then like being able to surround myself with friends that I really, really felt that were like the most supportive people, and, kind of finding that balance of a healthy social life and a healthy athletic academic, balance. So, I think with all of those factors combined, it turned out to be one of the best years ever.
Yeah. So that's one in 2018. And like I said, I've got my notes on you, and I've done some reading.
Yeah.
You were the top scorer at the championships on vault. At least you were the top
On
scorer.
vault, yes, not top scorer in general, but yes.
Yes, on vault. Sorry, I should have clarified before I said that.
You're great.
What kind of leader were you, with being the top vault scorer and being somebody that was, very important to the team? What type of leader were you? Were you more vocal, or was it literally all out on vault?
I think it was more or less just like leading by example type, because I was so focused on being like such a huge, like a 180 shift from what it was last year. Like,
Yeah.
knowing that like that year I was not contributing to the team whatsoever, athletically. I was mentally just so gone. And so like I wasn't providing good energy to the team. And so like I just wanted to make sure that I shifted all of that to provide what I needed for the team, both academically, athletically, and mentally, energy wise. So, I was really like before that fall, I was just so locked in. I was like, okay, I just really need, I wasn't even focusing on sticking it. I was just focusing on making sure that like all those little tiny points that led up to the stick were going to happen. So I'm huge on visualizing. So I visualized everything. I just really made sure that I did what I knew and that was routine for me, because I know that sticking to my routine was the best thing for the team. And so just really drilling in the things that I usually drill in. And then it just turned out to be a stuck vault. And that was just like the most phenomenal feeling. And then I could hear the uproar coming from the corral with the team, and then my coach in the back just like totally pounding the air. And it was just like the greatest feeling ever. And then we went to bars after that, and then also the same thing, because like that bar lineup was just so fired up. And then our coach Chris, he had this huge like outburst. It was just like the weirdest China like pep talk almost, but it was like a pep yell. And he was just like yelling at the team, but in a good way, trying to pump us up, obviously. But it was just like so out of character for him to do whatever he did. Like, I don't even know how to describe how he was portraying his emotion, but it was like everyone's just like so caught off guard of what he was, doing. And then we like walk out of the locker room just kind of like stunned of like what just happened. But then again, we were all just so fired up and just like so ready to like just nail it, because we were behind in the ranking at that point in the meet. And then after that bar lineup, we just kind of propelled right after that into the beam lineup. And I think that momentum brought us into the final, the final event of that meet, which is we really need to do so well in order to capture that national championship. So it was kind of like a situation where it's like underdogs take over, because we were so low in the rankings. Like everyone knew that Oklahoma was like going to win. Like they were going to win. That trophy was over by their corner at the end of the meet, because everyone knew that they had won. But then after our last routine, we ended up clinching it by like the smallest hair of a margin. And then everyone was just like running over to us after that. And so it was just like the most incredible feeling ever. But yeah, I think just like knowing that I can contribute in some small way to whatever that big moment was just so special for me. And I think that really helps the team, because I just did what I knew how to do. Right. And just, giving myself in that way, I think was the best thing that I could have done. So,
yeah. So after that 2018 year, you guys win the championship. How did things carry over? And, talk about the rest of your career as, after that championship.
Yeah, I think after that championship, we definitely raised our expectations of the team for sure. So we all had huge expectations for that coming season in 2019. Unfortunately, we didn't win the national championship, but we did get third at nationals. So still a huge, feat to accomplish. But I think there was, some playing safe towards the end, because everyone was just so focused on winning that national championship rather than doing what we knew how to do, which is, I think, because we knew we weren't going to win the national championship that year that we did win the national championship, I think our focus had shifted. And so the following year, we had the expectation of winning, where we didn't the year before. And I think
to
that
protect your title, right?
Right, exactly. So I think that expectation in itself put too much pressure on the team, to the point where we didn't choke, but to the point where we made small errors that kind of, collectively kind of hurt us in a bit. So yeah, it was also a great year. But that's also when I started to deal with a little bit more injury myself. So I was kind of in and out of lineup that year. And then the following year, I was completely out of lineup because of injuries again. So it was a lot of up and downs after that. And especially that senior year for me, 2020, there's a lot of uncertainty. That's when COVID hit. We had our season canceled right before our senior meet. And then postseason was canceled. So there was a lot of disappointment that year. But again, I think that disappointment, it's part of life, not everything is going to go well, and just making like having a mindset of like, oh, why are these things happening to me? It's like, oh, accepting the things that do happen and moving forward from that. I learned a lot of acceptance that year. Because there was a lot of things that kind of happened. So yeah, like another learning period after those two great great years that happened, propelling me into adulthood, where, adulthood is adulthood,
Yeah, certainly.
it's tough, and there's things that you have to learn along the way. There's not as much support, not as much help that you can get as you did when you were in undergrad. Like everyone's telling you how to do things when you're in undergrad. So I do miss, having all of that support, being surrounded by people that like truly genuinely care about you and are really looking out for your best interest. So that's something I definitely miss about undergrad, but I think now I'm in a healthy place, and all the things I've learned throughout my undergrad have definitely carried over into my adulthood. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So now you touched on a little bit. COVID came around, and
Mhm.
it's tough to navigate that.
Right. Yeah.
I've been a journalist for a very long time, and I've never seen anything like that. There were
Mhm.
championships canceled all over the country in a whole bunch of different sports, and you feel
Right.
for the
Yeah.
athletes. And for us, as somebody that covers sports, you're upset because you're like, man, I really wanted to see this. It's
Mhm.
awesome being
Mhm.
able to work at these events and be a spectator and be able to talk to these athletes and everything when they're in some of their highest moments and some in some of their lowest moments, just experience
Right.
it. So how did you and your team, more so, how did you kind of navigate that space of knowing that your season ended out of your control?
Mhm. Yeah. So I guess for me, knowing that that whole year was just a series of ups and downs, I had really learned the art of acceptance that year.
Yeah.
And so at that point, when things were canceled, I was bummed because I was super pumped. I thought that I potentially had the opportunity of competing in that meet on vault, because I was really, trying to get back from all these injuries that I had. I had knee problems, I had back problems, I had shoulder problems. I was just like a mess. So just like trying to rehab to get to that senior meet so that I can contribute with my seniors, my fellow seniors, because we were like, we can totally have a full senior lineup for this entire meet and it would totally work.
Yeah.
And that's never happened ever. We had 9 seniors, all with like fantastic credentials. We had 2 Olympians, we had like 3 or 4 elite gymnasts, and then everybody else was like, phenomenal level 10 gymnasts. So it's just like such a huge class, and such a huge class with a lot of, power. And so we were all so pumped for the senior meet and things like that. And then obviously, unfortunately, it didn't work out. But for me, I guess I was really looking forward to the future and kind of leaving gymnastics, in the past. That whole year, I had struggled with the idea of potentially, um, or was it medically retiring, because
Mm-hmm.
I was just so completely done with dealing with the injuries, and it was just so much disappointment that I was dealing with. And again, I kind of had a huge wave of depression, kind of like I did in the first year of my college career. So it was a lot to deal mentally with me. And knowing that I had already gone through so much that year, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, this is another thing that really sucks, but I know I can get through it, and I know there's things, coming in the future for me that I want to accomplish. So for me, I was just looking forward to the future rather than just kind of dwelling on the fact that like, oh, our final season canceled. A lot of people on our team were so disappointed, and I sympathize with them. Like, I understand it was a huge disappointment. We were all so looking forward to that final meet in Poly Pavilion, and then potentially trying to regain that title of national championship. But things happen. It sometimes it is what it is, and I think for me, knowing that I had all these plans for the future and some people didn't really know what they wanted to do, I think that was what kind of got me through it all. And then talking with, my coaches about it all, talking with my therapist, talking with, every other people that were kind of going through the same thing. And then also even talking to students that aren't in athletics, and kind of getting their perspective on it was kind of grounding for me, because I knew that they were also going through a lot of different difficulties than what we were going through. And yes, like being an athlete, like there's so many like, milestones that you want to hit, and there's so many different things that are different than being just a, a normal student. But being able to get like perspective on all the other things that were canceled on campus, and seeing how their hard work was also put into that, and also knowing that they were also disappointed kind of was a little bit of a comforting feeling, because we were all in this together, just being able to collectively grieve at it, but also collectively kind of go through the emotions and work through that, I think was important for how we kind of handled the situation.
Yeah. So you say you changed your major to psychology, and you also just said that there were plans that you had for your future. When you changed your major, how did it set those plans into motion, and how did you see them through after COVID and after being an athlete and everything else?
Right. So in high school, I was a huge like STEM person. I loved especially science. I loved biology, and I did well in those classes. So I was like, okay, maybe I could be some type of doctor or something. So that's kind of what my mindset was at when I first entered college and when I first picked my major. But then I realized that's not what I want to do. I don't think I want to go to med school. That seems like a really lot of work and a lot of time, a lot of money. And I was like, I don't think that's for me. So then I switched my major to psychology after my freshman year. Didn't really know where that was going to take me at all until I got to my senior year of or college. And that's when it kind of propelled me into where I'm doing now. I ended up being a part of this internship that was kind of like a partial hospitalization program, working with children with autism. And it was right on campus. So it was perfect. It was kind of in the neuroscience building on campus. And I got to hang out with like 2 and 3-year-olds for like 4 hours every day. And it was like the greatest thing. And I loved it. It was so fun. And after that experience, I mean, I was kind of going through a lot mentally during that time, and being with those kids really uplifted my spirits when I was kind of feeling down, and kind of made me forget about all my problems. And I think that was a huge indicator of what I want to do in the future. And I was like, I definitely want to work with kids. I feel like working with kids is something that is so uplifting for me. And I know I'm making a direct impact. And that's something that I've always wanted in a future job, knowing that I had, a direct impact on these kids, and like what people's futures are going to turn out to be. And so that was something that I really valued, and I've always valued. And being able to work with kids who have developmental disorders is a huge thing. And I felt really like humbled through the experience, and it was so rewarding. And so now I'm a behavior therapist. So I still work with kids with autism and other disabilities, helping them navigate how to change their behaviors into something a little bit more functional. And then now, after going through this behavior process, now I realize that occupational therapy is kind of where my passion stands. So I'm currently working on taking some prereq classes that I hadn't taken at UCLA, to start applying to occupational therapy grad school, which I'll apply to next fall, and then hopefully get in and then start school the following fall after that in 2023. So that's where my plans are right now. And I think that UCLA really gave me such a great platform to explore all of these things and give me the opportunities to find where my passions stand. And I actually found that internship that kind of really propelled me into everything through another athlete who had graduated from the soccer team several years before I had, and she worked there. And so she came for a wellness session that we had through athletics. So I was the president of a club on campus through athletics called SAMS, which is the Student Athlete Mentors Program. And then that program, we focused on health and wellness of student athletes, and how to uplift those, and how to navigate certain things within the athletic community that deal with mental health. And through that club, we brought in old athletes that practice wellness sessions and stuff like that. So she was a yoga instructor, and she did yoga with our group. And after talking to her, and she was like talking about what she does now, and she was involved in that internship as like more like a full-time staff. But Then I talked to her afterwards and like, this sounds like something I would totally want to be involved with. And then she got me connected. I got into the internship, and then time came, and then after that, now I'm here. So I'm so grateful for all those opportunities that UCLA gave me, and I don't know if I would be able to get that anywhere else. So super grateful.
Yeah. So you said you didn't really know what it was you wanted to do until you were a senior, right? Was
It took
kind
me a
of
long time.
yeah, was it tough knowing like, okay, the end of my college career is coming up, I should probably figure this out? Or were you like,
Right.
I'm going to continue to work and it'll figure itself out once I get there?
I think it was a combination of both. I'm a very anxious person, so I like to have a plan and I like to know what I'm doing. And not having that plan by the time I was a senior was a little stressful for sure. But I was definitely taking initiative to make sure that I can get to that point by, reaching out to staff in the athletic community about how to work on my resume or how to build connections and things like that. So just, taking initiative to do those initial steps, I think was where I kind of started at. And then, things kind of fell into place as you may, like, I don't know, like knowing that connection was there was something that I hadn't really expected. And then, talking through people in athletics kind of got me to find that passion that's actually outside of athletics. So it kind of worked out in itself. Mm-hmm. And I kind of had hopes that it was going to work out because I was like trying to reassure myself. I was like, oh, things will work out. But, sometimes they don't. And I was like a little hesitant about that. But then, eventually they did. So.
Yeah. You never know where things are going to take you, right?
I know, right? It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So Anna, this has been amazing. I love your story, hearing about you as well as your sister and everything that you guys went through together as well as separately. My last question for you is looking back on, your years as a young gymnast and recruiting and academically, what's a piece of advice that you would want passed down to a young person coming next in the next generation?
Yeah. That's tough. I think for any young person, I just want them to know that they should have fun doing whatever they're doing and enjoy whatever they're doing. If you're not enjoying it, then maybe that's not for you. Even though there's a lot of ups and downs, and even though I went through a lot of ups and downs, and there were times where I wasn't enjoying it, just like pushing yourself through that and finding a support group that can help you through those things and navigate those. And really allowing yourself to kind of reflect on if this is something you actually really want to do and move forward with, because ultimately, like, I did want to still stay with the team when I was kind of going through those tough spots. But just like pushing yourself to be who you want to be and who you want to see yourself be. And then having those like goals to kind of build yourself up to that point, I think is really important. So, having a big support group to help you, identify those goals, and then finding out what you really want in life and finding out what you really want to get to, I think is something that you should always reflect on. In terms of, the whole recruiting process, in terms of becoming a college athlete and all those other things. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's great. I like that. Thanks a lot, Anna. Like I said, this has been a lot of fun. I love hearing your story, hearing everything that you've gone through. And we're definitely going to be looking out for you and seeing that you're accomplishing everything that you are setting out to accomplish. And like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to let you get back to your day. I mean, like I said, it's still morning there in California.
I know. Super. What time is it? It's 11 o'clock.
Yeah. So you still have a good portion of your day to go. So I'm going to let you go throughout your day, and definitely good luck. And, thank you a lot for sharing your story with us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on this platform. I'm happy to share my story. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for listening to the Athlete Stories podcast. If you like this story, then you should check out our other podcasts with former athletes Tope Amade, Brianna Dubose, and Rowan McCullough, as well as our roundtable discussions where we discuss some of the most trending topics going on in sports.